All right, good morning, everybody, and good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Stephen Portnoy. Jan is traveling, so I'll be your moderator today. Today's topic is Web Components Update. And with that, I will hand it over to Sean. And there you go.
Okay, Steve, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Alrighty,
I failed to mention that if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the question panel, and we'll answer those as we come along.
okay, thanks for that. You can see my screen as well.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. We do the number 8, I believe, in our tech webinar series, going strong every 2 weeks, rain or shine, floods or snow. We had originally planned to do an interesting thing we've been working on, an online sample gallery. That's what we had announced 2 weeks ago. It's not quite ready yet, and we don't want to release it and announce it until it is. So at the same time, we had a bunch of new developments on the web components front. And since we've been doing web component updates every other webinar, we decided to keep with that theme because there's lots of cool new stuff to show. So we thought that that was important to get out. So that's what we're planning for today. We have two demos or items in our agenda. One is an update on a new repository that we've set up for extra Bootstrap components. So if you've worked with Servoy's NG client already, you know that the basic Bootstrap components are already available in addition to all the Servoy default components. So this one introduces some extra, more nuanced components. And then the second demo is a separate repository, which is for an enhanced tab panel component. So we'll be taking a look at that. Real quickly, just an overview of what is in the Bootstrap components repository. So far, we have breadcrumbs, input groups, a navigation bar to which you can add various kinds of nav menu items, basic badges, button grouping, and ratings, you know, like stars or hearts or likes, that kind of thing, as well as the image carousel. So that's what we have today. In addition to that, we also are announcing an enhanced tab panel component. Basically, so far, it allows you to close tabs by clicking an icon, and there's some APIs to make that also convenient to do programmatically. But that's the first release of this component. There are plans to add more enhancements based on some customer feedback that we already have. So we're starting small with that one. Right now, it's the same thing as a Servoy tab panel, but with closable tabs. Let's start the demo, and I'm going to go fairly quickly because, as you see, we have a lot of stuff to cover in the demo, and we try to keep these to about 25 minutes and leave room for questions. So I'm going to switch over to my NG client that I have running with the Bootstrap example. So you can see I have the different examples across in those tabs there. So we'll start with breadcrumbs. The breadcrumb sample is fairly straightforward. You have clickable breadcrumbs with the callback event, and it shows, of course, disabled where you currently are. So this could be set up for some navigation or something like that. You can remove the breadcrumbs, and then programmatically you can create breadcrumbs. So you could add a few more to it, say the 6th one and the 7th one. There is an option too to auto remove when a breadcrumb is clicked as well. So you could take them out of the list. So we'll take a closer look at that in a minute. Just want to show you everything that we have so far. If we look at input groups, this is an input field surrounded on left or right side with additional items. So you can see that we have something to the left of a field with a data provider in there. Everything's data bound, so you can see everything else updated. We have something to the right, we have something to the left and the right, etc. We can have different sizes. We can also include in our grouping, we can include buttons as well. So let me change my browser scaling here to show you what's down at the bottom is also one with multiple buttons and left and right add-ons. So you can really add as much as you want to the input group, including add-ons and buttons. Of course, whatever you can do at design time, you can do programmatically. So here I have a basic input, and I can programmatically attach some stuff to it, including buttons and add-ons. So we'll take a look under the hood at that as well. This is the nav bar example, and this is basically a place where you can dock nav menu items, and there are different kinds of items. There are basic links, there are buttons, and you can see that there's a callback happening as I click these. There is a drop down with sub items, and that goes one level deep. You can have an input group as well. So here we have a field with a value list, so I can have some type ahead going on here in my value list with a button. Again, with the callback. You can have plain text, and here's another menu drop down, which is docked to the right. So these are docked right, and these are docked left. Also, you can have a branding logo and text as well. You can inverse the menu, which will reverse the background color. And of course, everything that you can do at design time, you can do programmatically. So you can programmatically create menus, items, remove stuff. There's an icon menu here. So anything you can do at design time, you could do at runtime as well through the API. Badges are pretty simple. It's a way of showing a numeric value. This is just showing there's really two types. There's plain text as well as a button. And both of these are clickable, and you can receive a callback and handle that as well. Button groups is similar to the input group, except it's just for buttons only. And there's two modes, a radio mode and a checkbox. And just like radio buttons and checkboxes, a radio is only one option is selected at a time. And the checkbox option is that you can, check multiple and uncheck multiple. And you can see that these are data bound as well. As I check one, the other ones also highlight. So they're connected to a data provider. They're all connected to the same data provider in this case. And you can see that there's different options for styling. The values themselves come from a value list. So it's just like any other basic selector from other default Servoy components. You connect it to a data provider, you can connect it to a value list, you can set the mode to be radio or check, and then away you go. You can also style it with CSS, of course. The next one I want to show you is the rating, and this is fairly straightforward. Again, it's a data-bound component, so you connect it to a data provider, which gives you the value and stores the value of the rating. So it would be an integer value. So you can see that I can programmatic or manually type in a value, and you can see that it's updated. Additionally, one thing that I've set at design time is the min and max value. So this rating goes to 10, but I could easily just set it to 5. Here you can see that there's a percentage on mouse over, so that's a setting that you can toggle. And then here we're really just showing different CSS that's applied for sizing and font icons. You can see that that this one is showing, the mouse over as well. So when you hover, and then when you change value, it applies to everything. This is the disabled look. And you can also see that there's down here, finally, it's showing the last event that was received. So you get the on hover and on leave events for the value that was moused over, if you will. Okay, and finally, we look at the carousel. And this one says carousel no found set because there's really two modes to the carousel component. There's data binding to a found set, and then there's also sort of the manual mode where you could just pass in an array of images or an array of slides to it. So a slide is really an image plus a caption. By the way, I want to give credit for building all these samples to my colleague Patrick Russert, who also spent a lot of time over the weekend to make sure that this was all ready to release, both these nice demos, but also really helpful wiki documentation on the project site, which I'll show you the link to in a minute. And in this demo of the carousel, he set up a random image generator. So I'll use that here and just sort of set some slides. It starts off with 5 random images and starts transitioning through them. You can see that the cycle interval is the number of milliseconds. So if I wanted to speed this up, I could set it down to 1,000, which would be every second, and now it's going to start flipping faster. In addition, I could disable the transition, so now it's just flipping through without that slide look. A user can manually click back and forth, of course. Also down here where the little anchor is. You can remove slides programmatically. So now I transition down to 3 slides. Let me make this a bit longer here. I transition down to 3. I can remove them. I can programmatically add them. So again, this is working with a manual feed of slides where you just specify an image URL and a caption. There's also the capability to do this bound directly to data. So if you had, for example, a products table and you had images of the product, and whenever the user came to the product, detail form or something, you could then have a carousel of the product images going. So very easily you can do this with data binding. So both modes are supported. I thought maybe we could take a little look under the hood. As I said, there's really good comprehensive wiki documentation, but it's also nice to know kind of how it works a little bit. So let's jump into the first one we had set up here, which was the breadcrumbs. And this is fairly straightforward. Here's the breadcrumb component. You can see the once I've included the Bootstrap extra components, which you can do from the package manager. You can just install this, and then you get the components, and you can drag them onto a form. And so this is the breadcrumb component, and you can see the component properties here. Some of the things that you had seen, like the auto remove when clicked option. What's nice about the breadcrumb is that there are style classes for the last visited crumb and the crumb itself, and then the actual outer bar as well. So there's multiple levels of styling. The breadcrumb objects you can set up at design time, so you can see that they just have an ID and a display name. And then there's the event when the breadcrumb was clicked, and you can just go ahead and bind this to your own handler, and then it passes you the JS event plus the crumb object, which is nice because you get nice code complete here on something's happening in my IDE, but it passes this object, which it has the ID and the display name, and you can go ahead and handle that as well as the index, which is passed. Also worth looking at the API. So we had over here, you can see there are the add and remove methods, and you can see that those are called on the buttons here. So if I wanted to, for example, add a crumb, but this one adds a bunch of crumbs. This is pretty much it. This is the display name. You have the optional ID you can pass as well. So if you have stuff where you really need it to be unique, but you want to display something else. So pretty much you just pass in that array of objects, and that sets it up for you, and then you can handle the events. It's really easy. Let's go to the next example. which was input group. And so there's quite some examples here, but they all basically follow the same pattern. So if you look at one of these, you can see that there's really two kinds of objects that you can add to the group. One is a button and one is an add-on button. The other one is just a plain add-on. So this one just has an add-on, and you can see that that add-on is a text value and then a position. So this one is position default, which is left. And then you can also have one which is positioned to the right. This one has multiple add-ons, left and right. Another one to the left. You can also see the data binding on the group itself. So this is these are all bound to the same variable. If it's a form variable, as well as some of the properties that you can set on the entire group. Down here, you can see an example of one which has an add-on as well as an add-on button. So the add-on buttons are a little bit more complex because there are image style classes. So we're using font icons. And then you can also handle the click events. So there's right click, double click, regular click, etc. And of course, there's the position option as well. And then you can style the button individually. So you can see this one down here had quite some add-on buttons as well as add-on text. Again, everything has API. So if I highlight this plain one here and link with editor over here, you can see the methods to add an add-on, to add an add-on button, and it's also clear, which is exactly what was called when I clicked this button here. So doing what we did at design time, but doing it programmatically. And you can see here that first everything is cleared off that component, and then we create the add-on, and then we create the add-on buttons, and then we set the add-on buttons. So pretty straightforward to set up, and then you can go ahead and handle the callbacks. All right, moving right along to navbar. So here's the navbar component. As I pointed out in the demo, there's the branding. You can set up the logo and the text and even the style class for the logo. And then there was the inverse option. The items themselves are the subtype called menu items, and you can see that for the 5 ones that were there by default, we have this menu item object, and there's quite some options there. It can be bound to a data provider. The display type is going to be a regular plain text or a button or an input group, as you saw, and then you can also have it be a menu item. You can see that there was sub items in the I believe it was this one. Yeah, this one had that drop down with some sub items. So so this one we had set up for menu items there, and you can see that you can specify again style class for an icon, and I think one of these is a divider. Yeah, this one, the third one, is a divider. So all of this you can do at design time. And then for the component itself, you have a single method to handle the click event for the callbacks. There's also an action event for individual items too. You can see that the on action handlers here. So you can attach a handler at each item or on the component as a whole. In this case, it's just attached to the component, and you could see that it was printing out some info about the item text and the item ID. But there's also quite some stuff that gets passed if you look at code complete on menu item. you can see every option that's on there. So if you want to infer some other things, you can. Finally, there's everything that I've done. Everything that is done here at design time can also be done programmatically. So you can see if I link with editor, the API to add menu items and set some of the properties, remove menu items, etc. And this is exactly what was done on these buttons here. So for example, when we made the icon menu, this was just getting a random icon as a little utility method, a font awesome icon, and then adding that to the menu. Some of the other add items here was just getting a plain text one. So it's pretty straightforward. This component's a little more complex than some of the other ones because there are different display types and you can do submenus and etc. But all in all, it only takes a few minutes to pick up, and there's great documentation on it. Let's move on to the next sample, which was, come on, my IDE is slow from the GoToMeeting. The badge example is really simple. We'll just spend a minute on that. So there's two types. There's the text type. Display type is label, and then here display type is button. The style class you can see here is button primary. This one is button danger, and these are just how they look when they're disabled. So you can see that there's the enabled property, which is set to false. So that's really straightforward. It has a really simple set of properties and API, and of course there's the on action which you can handle on these guys. Also the click and the double clicks. Moving on to button groups. Again, this is straightforward. This works just like any other selection component in Servoy, like a checkbox or a radio button. You can see here that the input type is radio for this one. The input type is checkbox for this one. There's data binding to a data provider. In this case, it's a form variable. But that could, of course, be a database, a table column. You can do some styling. So we have the primary here. We have the warning style here. So whatever CSS you want to write, you can apply. Tooltips, and then, of course, the value list. That's important. That's where we're getting this left, middle, right. It's just a custom value list here. But, of course, that value list could be data-driven, just like any value list in Servoy. For the events, you can see that we have the on data change event, which you can just bind to your own handler. From the API side, it's there's not really much to talk about. It's just programmatically setting the properties. So again, this is a really simple component to set up and use. It takes just a minute to learn. All right, trying to get in everything before we get to that 11:30 mark. Let's jump to the rating. Again, rating is a lot like the badges and the button groups, because it's just a data provider. What's nice about the rating is the style class. You get a few style classes here for like where the state on and the state off. So if I get 3 out of 10, the first 3 stars are the state on style class. The next 7 are the state off. So you have total control over that, and of course the which icon you use, font icon you use, can be passed in there. And then there's the events, the on hover and on leave, and that just passes in the value that was hovered on. The one other thing to point out is the show percentage on hover, and this was set to true here. So you noticed on that first band of stars, it was actually showing the percentage on the mouse over. Let's jump now to the carousel. So in this example, we were just programmatically passing slide data. You can see that you could set, at design time, you can set the slide, so you don't even have to programmatically do it. Or you could set found set binding. So if you download this example, I didn't show it, but if you download this example, there's also the data bound version as well that you can look at. So you could select a found set, and then like if I picked my products table, and then from there it lets me choose if I'm loading all data providers, and then I can pick the data provider for both the caption and the actual image. So setting that up is quite easy. But in our case, we're doing the manual one and not doing it at design time, we're doing it programmatically. So you could see if I highlight this and link with editor, the API here for adding slides, removing slides, etc. So if you look at some of the buttons here that call that, adding an image here. So this is where Patrick had set up the random image generator and begins adding images to the slide. And all it is add slide, and a slide is again just a caption and a URL, and that's it. So it's pretty easy to work with. We have one other sample to announce, and this one is also very simple. Let me just switch my solution here for the tab panel extra. And while this is loading, again, this is really just a fork from the default tab panel in Servoy, and it adds a little bit of enhancement. So let me run this back here. So basically, we want to add tabs to a tab panel, but also some of them could be removable. So I'm just going to pretend this is my navigation for my large ERP or whatever it may be, and I start selecting tabs that I want to add. I add a few here, and then as I'm using my application, I decide that, yeah, I maybe want to remove this one. I'm not using it anymore. I can remove all, programmatically add all, that sort of thing. But really, it's this close button and then also the API to do it programmatically that we're talking about. So I can take you to the sample solution. So again, there's the tab panel here that I just drag onto the form, and this works just like the default tab panel here, where I can then drag a tab on there. So here I drag on a tab, and then I can set the contains form ID and maybe set it to, I don't know, customer, and then the text, customer, and then of course the option to close the tab, which is this show close icon. If I set that to true, it's now closable. Also, you'll notice that the tab itself has a property for the icon style class. So that little X is not hard coded into the component. You could put your own icon style classes in there. There's also the style sheet. You can override classes for what to do on hover and stuff like that. So it's quite flexible. So you can see now that if I switch back to my example, there's my customers, and this one is closable, but the welcome one is not closable, and it's just because of that one Boolean switch. Last thing to show is that when you look at the add all method, and it was calling this add tab method, it's the same as the add tab on the regular Servoy tab panel, but there's one option at the very end, which is that it's slow getting the code or the tooltip while GoToMeeting's running. But there's the last parameter, which is the close icon, and the default is false. But if you set it to true, then it will show the tab as closable. So that's it for demos. Real quickly, I want to point out the project home here. There's on GitHub a project home for both of these. As I said, my colleague Patrick really did a great job adding wiki documentation for all of this stuff. So, if you want to see how badges work, you just come here. If you want to see how that complicated nav bar works, it's all right here. Great documentation. The samples are downloadable from the release page of the project. Same here for the tab panel component. There's Wikidoc. It's only documenting what's different from this component and the default tab panel, because everything else is the same. What's next for these two repositories? We're going to continue to enhance them. There's already some plans based on customer feedback and requirements, but we also need this to be community driven like everything else. So please send us your use cases. I encourage you to create a GitHub account if you haven't already, where you can actually file issues that you have or enhancements requests. Can't talk. So here's those useful links. I'll leave these up here while I ask my colleague, Stephen, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Chris asks, the badges don't have a data property to show the count of a found set or such.
I knew this question was going to come up. I noticed that myself. Chris, I challenge you to create a GitHub account and file an issue on that repository for that enhancement. I think it makes sense to me that you would want the badge to be data bound for the numeric value. You can bind the text to a data provider, but the value itself was just the number. You could set it programmatically, but you'd have to do it, on record selection or something like that. So it makes much more sense that it be bound directly to a data provider. I agree. Please file a case on GitHub.
And Kim remarks that they like the faster pace of this webinar.
Well, it's fast because we had to cover a lot. So
we did.
I will try to drink coffee before every webinar and be fast.
Great. Well, great job, Sean and Patrick. One last question from Kim. Can images be allowed on the radio and checkbox objects?
I don't think it's exposed, although I could see that it wouldn't be too hard to do, I think. So if you're interested in that, please, again, go to the repository and file a request and let us know.
We will be posting a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as the links that are there for useful links. So we thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.
Anything else, Sean?
Nope. Bye, everyone.
All right. See you in 2 weeks.